That seems like it might be working. I'm going to share that link.
I'm going to try. Yeah, you just go ahead.
Hey!
Okay, cool. Hello. Ryan, do you want to kick us off?
Yeah, I figured we might give it a minute for people to filter into the brand new YouTube link that we've got there. In the meantime, we can talk about exciting things, like the Zoom watermark on that video is.
So Jamie sent me a massive bit of information about how to get rid of that Zoom watermark and some really cool stuff. And I've not done any of it, but sorry about that. But I've got the information, but I've not applied the information. Is what I'm saying.
Mm-hmm.
That's it's one of those minor features that you add into the backlog that never gets done, right?
Absolutely.
Cool. Well, why don't we kick off? We can start our talking. People can join as they like. So yeah, welcome everyone. Welcome especially to the people in this smaller set of boxes that I have here, but everyone on YouTube as well. Yeah, I'm really enjoying the return of JSOxford, but in NotJSOxford, and the sort of maybe JS, probably not this evening, definitely not in Oxford though. A good place to start is probably to mention the code of conduct that we have as always. That applies to us and it applies to everyone commenting on YouTube. So yeah, be nice, ask questions, and if you've got any questions about that, then ping us on the Digital Oxford Slack. So yeah, the format for this evening is we're going to have another talk chat. There's a couple of things we want to talk about, and it's obviously pretty informal as they always are. The first one we're going to talk about is a little thing about coaching, and then we'll talk about Kubernetes, and Marcus is going to school us on his setup that he's got for a load of personal stuff. Feel free to ask questions in the YouTube chat, so we'll pull things in from that as we go. And yeah, it's all just a big conversation. I guess a good place to start is to say hello to the lovely panel. And yeah, I want to talk a little bit about coaching. And at the end of this, just to prime you for it, I'm going to say, has anyone been coached or done any coaching? And I'll just leave that there for a minute. So yeah, this Saturday, we're running a workshop online in Zoom. The only reason why I'm talking about coaching is to plug a workshop. I feel like I should have a book in the background. And yeah, I'll paste a link. You can all sign up later. But we did it back in 2017 in Oxford, in the Centre for Innovation, which was like back when we could actually meet up in person and do real live workshops. It does not feel as long ago as it was. And as we started setting up this workshop, it made me kind of reflect on what I got out of coaching since I first did a qualification like 4 years ago, back when I actually had hair. And yeah, so I think what I'm going to talk about quickly is what I got out of coaching and what it kind of is to me, and then maybe we'll open it up and have a bit of a chat. So yeah, I guess a good place, same as the coaching talk that I gave at JSOxford years ago, is that the coaching is trying to help other people figure out the problems for themselves. So it's distinct from mentoring, where you might use your experience to help someone, like you can effectively give them answers or help them understand what things might be like from your perspective. Whereas with coaching, we're trying to ask questions in a way that help that person understand or make their own decisions, because often we have all the information we need, we just need help processing it. And the thing that goes along with that is that you're not trying to give solutions at all. Like, it doesn't really matter if you don't know the answer, which is one of the reasons why I like coaching, because it means that you don't have to have the answer, and that's pretty much me all the time. And yeah, there's kind of three things to it. One is creating a safe space. So having a space where you can have a conversation with someone, ask them questions, and help them feel comfortable to be open, and also help them feel comfortable to not talk about things that they're not comfortable about. It's like the idea of sort of emotional psychological safety, and then active listening. So actively listening, maybe I'll dig into that in a bit, and then asking probing questions to try and get that person to think about the things that they're saying, like reflecting things back, rephrasing it and saying, what do you think of that? And yeah, there's a couple of times where it's really helped me. One of them was actually when I was deciding whether or not to leave Oxford. I had a bunch of things I could have done. I was doing a bunch of contracting, and ultimately I just needed to be somewhere with hills. What can you do? But it's a big life choice. And there isn't really a right or a wrong answer, but there is that journey that you need to go to kind of get acceptance to what you might want to do. And there was another point where I was, again, with my little micro business, where I was trying to do consultancy and doing contracting on the side. And I had a coach where they helped me figure out how and what I wanted to focus on, because when you're working on your own, you don't necessarily have a peer group you can talk about. It's kind of hard to get that objectivity. And I found having a coach was really valuable for that, because they asked questions that made me, or they held me to account when I was saying things which maybe I didn't believe in, and asked questions which made me realize I didn't really believe in that. And then I guess the final thing before I kind of put it back out to questions is, outside, when I've not been doing coaching, or I've not been coached, and the techniques that I've learned through coaching, like framing questions and kind of guiding people through a decision-making process, has really helped me in my work life. It's probably helped me in my home life, but if I start saying that I coach people at home to do the things that I want, maybe that would be less good. And so I love it. Like, you can tell I'm enthusiastic about it because I want to run a little course. But yeah, I'm interested to hear what the rest of the panel's experiences, and actually people on YouTube. What have you experienced with coaching, and has it been positive, and what have you learned from it? And that's me.
So yeah, I think I've sorry, I can kick off, I guess. It's cool. I'm really interested in coming along on your course on, it's Friday, right? Friday morning.
Saturday morning.
Saturday morning. Cool. Oh, Saturday morning. Yeah, but because I didn't make it the last time you did it, but I guess we've talked quite a lot about it independently. Like, I think you've kind of helped me in a similar way kind of work out what I'm wanting to do in a situation, or if I've got a decision to make. I think probably actually weirdly think about it, I think of what my coaching experience is being coached by you sometimes, which is good. It's kind of helped do quite a few kind of decisions and stuff. But I think I don't know. It seems good. I'd love to get better at it, but the thing that I'm doing at the moment, I've been reading this book recently. This wasn't planted here. I have been literally reading it, which is called Never Split the Difference. And this is a really interesting thing, because it's actually it covers some of the things that you mentioned about, like active listening and asking leading questions and like labeling information and stuff. But it's a management book, but it's written by a CIA negotiator. So basically, all the things are like very extreme situations, like someone having hostages in a bank or something like that. But they apply kind of like listening techniques and labeling techniques to that, and kind of make it applicable to kind of everyday conversations and stuff. Which I'm only a few chapters in, but it's been brilliant. It's super cool.
So can you now like diffuse a hostage situation? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, like I am. As I said, I'm only a few chapters in, so if there's a hostage situation, I can diffuse like about 30% of it. I think that's yeah. But yeah, just give me a shout. No,
it's usually unique as well. Whenever you have to negotiate a license, you need a new piece of kit.
So,
high stress situation.
Yeah, absolutely.
Does it not change the, I guess, the quality of conversations that you have with your like everyday people, like your friends, your family, conversations that aren't, high stress or aren't business negotiations or aren't negotiations where you would need to use these skills? Because like obviously that's a skill that you pick up. Inadvertently, that's going to kind of bleed through into other aspects of your life.
I mean, that's with this kind of stuff, like from my perspective, there's a lot of things skills that we have already as humans, right? Like, so when people refer to you by name, you often feel a bit closer to them, right? Like, and this gives you kind of some tools like that. And so it might be a difference of saying, like demanding something or letting the other person arrive at the conclusion, like, so by saying leading questions, like I can't think of any examples right now, but one of the, actually I can't think of an example. So for instance, labeling fears, right? So if you're able to say directly, it sounds like you're worried about this thing, and if you're able to say that straight out in that way, then it brings it into the open and you're able to discuss it. Whereas if you went, instead of saying it sounds like you think this, you said you're scared of that. It's like you're in a completely different position, right? Like, but yeah, again, I'm only a few chapters in. I shouldn't have even started saying about it. And also, I feel like this is I basically like sidetracks what Ryan's trying to say about the activist thing and stuff that you're doing.
No, I think it's A, really valid. B, we need to talk on that in like, a month's time when you finished it. One of the first things I did when I was doing my coaching qualification was learned about that kind of reflecting things back. So saying, if you let me play this back to you, it sounds like what you're saying is this, 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 and this. And when I learned that, I found I was using it all the time. And so, yeah, to go back to your point, Gabor, it absolutely changed the way I was having conversations with my friends, because I was just using the same construct as it. You kind of process it and add it to your toolkit. I think it's a lot like any of these things. You kind of feel like you've got this hammer that you can use on all of the things, and then it becomes subconscious and you just use it regardless. But once you get over that kind of hump and it becomes normalized, it just helps you have better quality conversations. Yeah, particularly like labeling and reflect and playing things back means you're more likely to get have a common understanding of the thing that you're talking about, even if you're not trying to work your way through something contentious or coach them like that. Sarah, I mentioned coaching, you looked like you said that you'd had some.
I actually have a coach.
Ooh.
So our work is doing this program that basically, if you're a woman and you wanted to go into management, you could apply to this program, and part of this program is they give you a mentor, a coach, and a sponsor to try and give you the tools and the people you need to learn the skills to get to be where you want to be. So I find it really interesting, like hearing about coaching and also having like a coach and a mentor at the moment, and how different those roles like actually really are, and how you talk to them about completely different things and how they're both really useful. Because I think for a long time I thought like they were just the same, but they're really not. Like I talked to my coach a lot more about like the bigger picture things and like trying to work out where I actually wanted my career to go. Whereas like my mentor's more that person I go to where I'm like, so there's this like weird situation that's come up at work. How do you deal with that?
Yeah, it's really nice to see that they've actually split it out. I know when we were talking about it at NotJSOxford years ago, I actually lumped it together in the talk, because it's just the idea of having the intent to help someone, but because they solve two very different things, like you say, it's only when, I guess it's when it formalizes into a profession, like coaching, there's a lot of qualifications you can do that I know nothing about, that take you down a path where you become like laser focused on just doing that and never giving an answer, which must be infuriating sometimes.
I would definitely like say if anybody is ever unsure of something, going and finding like a coach is really like handy and useful. and it's just somebody else that like isn't in your necessarily like day-to-day life or job that you can bounce things off and just get a completely different perspective of somebody who's like not really, they're invested in you as a person, but maybe like not the work you're doing per se.
Yeah, I guess that's an interesting question. Like, what you got a coach and a mentor when you started on that program or on that group, but if you're not past that, it's when do you choose to go and find a coach? And it can be a really intimidating thing if you've never been coached before, because you don't really know what to expect.
I feel like in a way you're putting yourself in like maybe a slightly vulnerable state, because you're putting yourself out there and saying like, look, I think I need help to like work some stuff out and work out where I want to be taking my career or this. And like it takes a lot to realize that and then be like, hello, please help me now.
Yeah, it's. I remember talking about about leaving Oxford, and it was really, it felt really vulnerable because it felt quite vain to be going, oh well, you know what can I have which I like? Like how can I cycle more or go climbing? All these things that give me joy, and like I want to talk to you about me having more joy. Yeah. I I've only had 2 experiences of coaching, so my sample size is too small. But it was always way more intimidating sitting waiting to meet them the first time than being in any of the conversations. And I guess that's a testament to how well they built up kind of rapport and the safe space that made me feel like I could talk about things. Yeah. And actually, seeing as I'm plugging this workshop on the Saturday, one of my coaches was Catherine, who's the coach who's helping run the course. And yeah, I'm sure actually it'd be great if anyone has any recommendations for coaches, and it'd be also maybe good to put that link for the thing you were talking about, Sarah, into the chat. But yeah, if you're not sure of a coach, I can recommend her heartily. It seems like we may have exhausted all of our chat about coaching.
You know what? Like I'm really interested in coaching stuff, but then we're trying to get this link live as well. I don't know what's happening here. I just merged the PR without even looking at any code while I was trying to half listen to the coaching. I don't know.
Standard for you though, right?
Yeah, no, I'm also doing that. But earlier you mentioned that a coach doesn't actually give you, or the person, any answers. A coach just kind of asks the person in such a way that they figure out the solutions to themselves. But like, what happens if the person genuinely does not have enough information to make a decision? Like, how does a coach navigate that? Because speaking from personal experience, if I'm stuck, it's because I've exhausted, or I think I've exhausted all of the information that I think I know, and I am truly genuinely at a standstill, and I just need more information, like actual input from someone, not just like, oh, you know exactly, but let me ask you a different question.
Yeah, that is a really good point. I guess there's 2 kind of classes of question that jump out, and one is the things that have concrete answers, like if we're developing a site and we can't get it to deploy to Kubernetes, and like how do we get that to work? You can't really coach someone through understanding how to gain that technical knowledge if they don't have the answer and you're trying to do it in that call. For the more for the other things, I think someone's posted in YouTube chat, and that just the idea of a rubber duck. You can often, you don't know that you know the answer, or you just maybe like subconsciously refusing to decide because it feels risky, or because you haven't talked through the options that you've got available. And coaching tends to be most useful when you are able to figure out your options. Like when I was started being coached, that ended up with me deciding that I wanted to move to somewhere with mountains. It didn't start with me going, I want to move somewhere with mountains, should I do that? We kind of meandered through what I wanted to get out of my business and what I wanted out of a career, to kind of find the nub of what was the big thing that I wanted to do, what was my concern. And then from that, we kind of went, well, what are the options that might make me happy. I was pretty happy at the time, but what might make me happier? And we, like, I remember we had these sheets of A4 paper, and I was like drawing out these things that might fit together, like owning a house, like financial stability, but being on a bike, and all this stuff. And there's so many variables that well, for that there isn't really a good answer. If I'd stayed there, if I'd moved to Scotland, if I'd moved to France, like all those things would probably work out. But it's having this kind of rubber duck, this person to talk to, and where a coach is really useful is that they will ask questions that make you think about things in a way that you haven't, but using the information you already have, which is a pretty vague and nebulous answer.
I found as well, like, a coach helped me like realize there were possibilities there that I hadn't thought of. Like, especially like in my job, he told me about lots of different jobs and like how he got to where he was away, and I was like, oh right, so there's this whole other world over there that I'd never thought to even look at or think about.
Yeah, it's like I guess there's also that idea of challenging things. So when you make a statement, it may not be true. And part of the goal of being the coach can be to help tease out why that isn't true. Like, do you really feel like that? Or is this really a constraint? Can you definitely not quit your job because of X? And yeah, maybe you can, maybe you can't. Don't quit your job unless you want to.
So
I just think about past experiences. Something I did go to, wasn't a coach, but as a change management consultant. And like, this is like years ago with a company I was working for was wanting to change. And it felt like that was a similar kind of experience for us. Because like that person, she basically gave us the tools to view the problem, so she didn't actually kind of like say any, she didn't say like, shut down the company. It was more like, but I think the one that has stuck with me from that has been that when you're making a decision between two different things, try and make the decision about the positive reasons for doing the other thing rather than the negative things of what you're doing at the moment. So like, for instance, wanting to move because there are mountains where you go into is a better reason to do something than to want to move because you don't like rivers where you're at, or it's like you're kind of like you're a bit more directed with what you're trying to do, and that's kind of stuck with me. But I don't know, and I think I've told quite a few people that, but I've kind of passed them off as like some Zen wisdom thing.
I think avoiding stuff is just as valid as trying to get some other stuff. Like, yes, I would love to be able to climb a mountain, but there are untold number of places where I can climb a mountain. But if I don't know, for whatever reason, absolutely hate Oxford, and my number one grievance is, I want to get away from Oxford, then I would probably focus on that. And like, I know that just kind of makes me feel that having having a negative reason to do something is kind of a bad thing, which is it?
Yeah, no. So that's exactly what I'm saying. Like, so I think what I'm saying is like, so the reason for like hate. I don't know what we made this about hating Oxford, but it's like
Oxford is lovely.
In that it's like, welcome to NotJSOxford. So in that example, it's like you could view the problem two ways. You could view it like I hate everything about this place, I want to leave, to I really want to go to that place because it's not this place, and that's like, it basically swaps it around slightly and makes it more of a kind of positive move rather than kind of focused on like, because the danger with like focusing on changing where you're at and focusing on negatives of that is that you won't actually change it. Like you might not have realized that's the thing that you're interested in doing. Right. Does that answer your
Kinda, but like in that situation, it's essentially making two choices. choice number one is I need to move away from wherever I am that I don't like. Choice number two is I want to move to that specific place. But for example, what happens if I can't actually, I am not in the emotional or mental state to make the second choice of where I want to actually move to until I solve the first one that's blocking me from, because I want to move away from wherever I am.
Yeah, there's certainly times where running away is the right thing to do, as much as that, like you say, never run away, always face up to things. I guess where coaching or being able to talk to someone about this can be really useful is unpacking why you need to leave. Like jobs are generally a really good examples because they tend to build up to the point where you hate the thing and you feel like you've got to escape. Whereas you probably don't hate all of the things about it, even though, like that person just left a comment on the PR that you could interpret this way and makes you really angry. There's probably, like, if you unpack the journey that you've been through, you can find out the things that are the reasons why you need to leave. And then I guess like Ben said, you can kind of turn that around so that when you're in a place where you can look for something new, you've got more tools, you're better informed about the thing that will make you feel happier, rather than just kind of going, oh, this other company will be better because it's not this company, or, like, this town is not Oxford, so it'll be better. Rivers are great round Oxford, by the way, Ben.
Yeah, I know. I was struggling there because I was like, and I was both struggling, and it was like a bad example to start off with. It's like so. Yeah, but I think moving jobs is going to be a better one. Yeah. Though having said that, since we're JS Oxford-ish, don't leave Oxford. I think I'm just gonna say that unless there's some really good reason, but I don't know.
Where you dialed in from, Ben?
I'm in Dublin. Yeah.
Isn't that the furthest away out of all of us?
Ryan? Maybe, yeah. I'm kind of back and forth, so.
Dialed in. I've started saying, we've dialed into this meetup like it's still the late 90s.
I was 5 then.
Now I feel even older.
So, out of curiosity, who on this call actually lives inside the city of Oxford?
Are we doing Oxford or Oxfordshire?
Oxford City, like within the ring road. So none of us. That's amazing.
Expensive, man.
Like Oxfordshire?
If you want to be on the panel, you'd be on the panel in a subsequent show, and you have to be living in Oxford and be in Oxford for the call to be eligible. That's the only. Cool.
This is going to be great viewing, like after the live stream.
But it feels like that's probably a nice point to stop and to move on to something more technical, albeit not JavaScript. So yeah, Marcus, do you want to tell us about Kubernetes and how you've been using it?
Sure. Let me just get set up. Wicked. Right. So I think it was maybe a couple of weeks ago now, me and Ben were kind of having a little chat on Twitter, and I was talking about some of the stuff that I've been doing with kind of like the personal apps and stuff that I host, and a bit of back and forth. And Ben said it sounded quite interesting and all this kind of thing. Don't want to come to give a talk about it. I was like, yeah, sure. The problem was, it's a big. What we were talking about, there was a lot, right? So I put out on Twitter, what specifically do they want to hear about? And it's still quite broad. So I'm actually going to potentially cover 3 topics within this talk. I'm really encouraging people to ask questions and to comment and whatever throughout. So either on YouTube, on Twitter, on Slack, wherever, find us somewhere. hit me up on any of these things. Like on Twitter, you'll find me at Marcus_Noble_, and everywhere else pretty much is Average Marcus. I'm going to have little breaks in between the topics as well for questions and stuff to cover. But yeah, if we don't get through them all, that's fine. And if you are interested in any of the stuff we don't get to cover, find me elsewhere and we can chat some other way. So without further ado, let me just go over a little bit about me for those that don't know me. I work professionally as a DevOps engineer at Elsevier, along with Sarah. My main focus tends to be around Kubernetes and containers and all that kind of fun stuff. I was previously a JavaScript developer, so I'm allowed to be here like as an alumni, but now I'm very much a Go developer, and all the stuff I build is pretty much in Go or Bash scripts. So I've definitely moved more into the ops side of things. For as long as I can remember now, I've been running my own servers in some fashion, whether that's a machine tucked under my desk or as a cloud hosted instance somewhere, a VPS or whatever. So I've got a bit of like personal history on like running my own infrastructure, as it were, and how I'm going to talk a bit about how that's evolved over time and things. Another thing that I want to say fairly recently, but been going on for a long time, but has recently got quite more part of kind of the stuff I do, is I like to tinker with a lot of smart home stuff. And when I say tinker, I mean like not just go out and buy the top of the range things, but buy the little ESP8266 boards and kind of put together my own little smart device and things like that. I think the previous year, being stuck in the house all the time, has kind of really made me want to kind of dive into that some more. So I've now recently, 2 years now, bought my own house, so I can actually start doing things to this house that is what I want to do to it. So I've been putting all the smart stuff like everywhere, and I can go through a bit of that. So before we go on, the three topics that I'm hopefully going to get to go over is first off kind of what I'm calling my personal network setup. So this is where all the Kubernetes stuff comes into it. So this is the servers I run, the kind of apps that I run, how I run them, why I run them, etc. I've had a fair few people kind of ask me about this kind of thing in the past. There's a chat recently at work, I think last week or something, where we were talking about kind of the network devices that we've got near us, and my list was considerably larger than anybody else in the chat. So hopefully that's of interest to some people, and that kind of leads on quite nicely with the smart home stuff. So a lot of that stuff is these many devices that I've got around the room. I mean, in this small office that I'm in at the moment, I think there's about what you could class as 10 smart devices of some capacity. So yeah, and the final one, if we get around to it, I don't have a whole lot to say on it, but this is kind of the thing that sparked off the conversation with Ben, is how I've gone and replaced Google Analytics on my website, and how I've leveraged some of the stuff that I'm already using within my personal network setup to kind of get the information that I wanted out of, get the kind of analytics that I wanted. It's not necessarily a full replacement to Google Analytics, so don't expect that, but it's me getting the information that I care about. So I'll kick off with my personal network setup, and I'll start by going through kind of where things are as of today. So on my home LAN, I have 87 uniquely identifiable devices connected. Not necessarily connected all the time. Some of them are off for a considerable amount of time. So, some of them are old devices that, I tinker with every now and again, but there are 87 things that I can point to and say what they are. I've also got a Zigbee network of an additional 32 devices. So this is all my, well, not all, this is a good chunk of my smart home stuff. So for those that don't know, Zigbee is a kind of wireless mesh technology. So all the Zigbee devices kind of communicate with each other to form a big mesh to then pass the messages along. And it's a really good kind of low power usage kind of network. So some of the things that I've got for that, for example, are like motion detectors, some of the lightings that I use, all that kind of thing, which I'll cover a bit later on. Also, I run my own Kubernetes, I say cluster, but it's a single node. It's not really a cluster, but there's not really another term for it. That's running on a dedicated desktop machine that's kind of just down here under my desk, that I use for running kind of, at the moment, it's about 14 applications that are running on that. I also then have a cloud-hosted Kubernetes cluster with Scaleway, using their what they call Capsule, like a managed Kubernetes cluster. That's in an auto-scaling group, which is between 1 to 3 nodes, depending on the loads the applications are putting on the cluster. So that will automatically scale up and down as is needed by the workloads that I put on there. And that's got roughly about 30 different applications on it. I've also got a few Raspberry Pis knocking around. So one of the Raspberry Pis that I've got running is an application called Home Assistant, which is kind of the center of all my smart home stuff. So this is an application that allows you to interact with smart devices of all sorts of brands and technologies and stuff. So this connects to all the Zigbee networks. There's a little USB devices in there that connects to that, connects to a bunch of the Wi-Fi stuff, connects to a few cloud things as well that I've got. And that's kind of just like the center point for all these things, bring them all together. And that can also then run dashboards and stuff that I've got throughout the house. It can do some automations. It can, there's a mobile app as well, so I can get notifications for various things. Final thing I want to talk about is I've also got another Raspberry Pi that's connected to my 3D printer that's running an application called Octoprint. You can kind of see over here somewhere. And that allows me to then remotely control my 3D printer while I'm out and keep an eye on how it's doing. So I can upload some models to it through a web UI. I can kick it off, and if it's a long print, so I've had some before that's taken like more than a day to print, I can keep an eye on that, and I've got a webcam hooked up to it, so I can see the video and see how it's doing, and make sure it's not turned into a big ball of plastic mush that I need to then cancel, which is really nice. So that's where we are today. Let's take a little bit look at where I've been previously. So prior to the machine that I've got currently under my desk running the single node Kubernetes cluster, I've previously had it running on a Raspberry Pi 4, running a slimmed down version of Kubernetes that's called K3S, which kind of is full-blown Kubernetes, but it's got rid of a few of the things that are not necessarily used so often. So unless you're doing anything really advanced with Kubernetes that's kind of really niche and bespoke sort of thing, it's a great way to get started. A couple of problems I've had with that is, because it's running on the Raspberry Pi 4, there's only ARM support for it, for the architecture, the applications. When I had it set up, the 64-bit ARM version of the Raspberry Pi 4 OS wasn't ready, wasn't like stable enough to use yet. So I was still on the 32-bit, which was even more limiting, which made me have to manually build some of the applications I wanted to run on that myself. So I had to get the source of those applications and build an ARM-based image for them. And I also had to, rebuild all my stuff in ARM as well, whereas normally I'd have them as AMD 64 on my machine, which is not a problem. I got all those kind of working, but I hit a few stability issues. So, the Raspberry Pi is not very powerful. It's designed for, very low kind of workloads. The sort of stuff I was wanting to run on it was fairly CPU intensive at the time. So I had a lot of issues where it'll either drop off the network unexpectedly without any seeming cause, or disk issues and all these kind of things. So I eventually switched back to a whole desktop machine. It's just running on old hardware. So it's stuff that I've had lying around for a few years now. So it's nothing particularly top of the line, but it does the job. I'll cover that a bit more later. So prior to the cloud Kubernetes cluster that I've currently got, I was running a VPS instance with bhost, which is now owned by Mythic Beasts. I was running this thing called Doku, which is kind of an open source version of Heroku, if you've come across that. So you basically just push code, push a Git repo to it, and it kind of on the fly builds a Docker image for you and runs that all behind the scenes. You don't really need to know anything about Docker per se to be able to run Docker. That was all right, but it was a bit of a pain. It was getting a bit of a pain to manage, and I was running an old version that then needed some fairly extensive steps to migrate, and yeah, and you know, then I got Kubernetes and made things a whole lot easier because that's what I was doing day to day in my day job. So that's where I've been. Now, I want to quickly go back to those 87 devices that I've got on my network and kind of explain how that all kind of fits together. So for a few years now, I've run quite a complex-ish network for within a home where it's really just me in the home that's, you know, techie. So this is kind of what it looks like. So one of the cool things about having this new build property is I've got fiber to the property coming in through with Zen Internet, which I highly recommend. That goes into the ISP modem that's downstairs, under the stairs in the cupboard, tucked away in a really awkward place that, you know, is hard to get to, Wi-Fi signals crap and all that sort of thing. So I've got then a power line from there up into my office. If you don't know, a power line is a way of sending the network traffic over your home's electric circuitry. So you plug it into your plug socket in one area, plug it in somewhere else, and it goes up. It's magic. I don't know how it works. From there, it's then plugged into the router that I use mainly, which is TP-Link Archer C7. Now over the years, I've gone through quite a few different routers for this sort of thing. Quite happy with this one so far. It's running Open WRT on it, Open Water, I don't know how to pronounce it, rather than the standard TP-Link firmware, so that I can kind of have more customization to it. I can script a few things, and all the setup of these 87 devices is a lot easier because I can do it all kind of through code. From there, I've then got some mesh Wi-Fi beacons that connect into the router. So because the house that I'm in is kind of three levels, so I've got a bedroom on the top, middle floor, and downstairs I've got one on each floor. So it then works as a mesh network to spread the Wi-Fi moderately over the whole of the house. And then those 87 devices connect somewhere in that. So of those 87 devices, only about, I think it's 5 devices are connected via Ethernet, via a cable plugged into either the router in my office or into one of the mesh beacons. So there's one plugged in downstairs, one plugged in upstairs, that kind of thing. Everything else then is via Wi-Fi or the Zigbee network that I mentioned earlier. And every device that I've got on my network has a dedicated IP with it and an assigned host name, which I elected to go for the periodic table of elements to name them all because it's a big list of elements and I'm getting close-ish to, you know, I've gone past the elements that I recognize, put it that way.
I guess the nice thing about that is it puts like an upper bound on the amount of devices that you should have.
yeah, there's going to be a point where I have to get into science and discover a new element to be able to buy new devices. So yeah,
I just want a new light bulb.
So yeah,
you can go into like simple molecules like salt.
Yeah. So right, so let's take a little look at the Kubernetes clusters that I've got and how they look. The one that I've got locally here under my desk, like I said, it's just an old desktop machine I've had lying around for years. It's currently running Ubuntu, whatever the latest official version is. I can't remember off the top of my head. I'm using micro Kubernetes distribution with that. So that's a kind of like K3S. It's a more opinionated version of Kubernetes. The only reason I went for that is with the version of Ubuntu that I've got installed, it was one of the options during setup, and it was really nice and easy to get set up, and updating is really easy as well. Other than that, it's just Kubernetes from all I care. And that's using the latest officially supported version, which is 120. And again, that's just a 4-core CPU, 12 gigs of RAM in it, which is the main thing that makes that useful, and a bunch of different hard drives in there as well that I make use of. Primary use case that I've got for the local one here is for hosting any kind of either sensitive that I don't want on the internet or kind of local specific stuff that need access to the stuff in my local network within the house. So for example, I've got a CCTV monitoring application that I built myself that covers 8 cameras that I've got set up around the house that it only connects to over the local network. So having that on the internet, not great. I don't want to risk it. Keep it all nice in here. You know, I don't want you all to see me sleeping. The other thing I've got is like some automated download tools. So not been particularly useful this past year when I've been in the house totally, but previously it's been good. Like when I'm out, I'm able to kind of kick off some downloads remotely. So if I see a new application or something that looks cool, I can kind of send it to this and it will download it for me and it'll be ready on my machine when I get back. Stuff like that. It's quite nice. And also a DNS-based ad blocker is served on there as well. I've got AdGuard currently in there. I've previously used Pi-hole, which is the same sort of thing. I just like this because of how minimalistic and focused it is. Yeah, so that allows me to just block some ads based on the DNS address. So the cloud version of Kubernetes I've got, as I said, that's on Scaleways Cloud. So they're quite a nice cloud provider that's based in France. So they have a data center in France and Amsterdam, I believe. And they've got a managed Kubernetes platform called Capsule, which is really nice. I'm really enjoying it so far. And on that, I've got it set up with an auto scaling set of worker nodes. There's between 1 and 3, as I said, based on the workload of the dev1_m instance type, which is their smallest instance that will work for Kubernetes. With those, you get 3 vCPUs, 4 gig of memory, and 40 gig of hard drive space on the instance itself. I've then got 14, I wrote this, I think that's still right, PVCs, which are persistent volume claims. So that's additional disks that get attached to the instance on the fly that Kubernetes then uses in its pods to give application-specific storage. Again, this is running the latest version. This is 120. One of the things I really liked about Scaleway is how quickly they've got the new versions out once they're officially released from the Kubernetes team. So I think 120 was supported within a week, I think, which is pretty impressive for a managed service. So yeah, I'm enjoying this so far. All the code that I've got to set up this infrastructure, so all the instances, the capsule and stuff, and everything that's within the cluster, so all the pods that I've got, all the DNS, etc., that's all stored in Terraform and stored in Git, so I can bring everything back quite easily. So if I do go and absolutely destroy my infrastructure at some point, I can bring it back within 20 minutes or so, minus the persistent storage. So the primary use case that I've got for this is pretty much anything that I want internet facing. It also provides a nice, secure, authenticated tunnel back to my local cluster. So I use an application called Inlet, which allows my local cluster to call out to my cloud cluster and set up a tunnel for specific applications. And in front of those, I've then got an authenticated panel. So yeah, I actually have to go through Auth0 is what I use for that, before it even allows it to go through that tunnel. So on there, I've got a personal blog plus a few other related sites. So the slide that you're seeing at the moment is hosted on there. This is from a website that I've got up on that cloud. I've got a whole bunch of self-hosted cloud service alternatives. So I've got Git on there as for my Git service. So all my Git repos get put to my personal Git instance, and then I also have a job set up that will replicate those Git repos into GitHub, into GitLab, and into Bitbucket as well. So my stuff ends up everywhere. So if you want to open a PR to something, it's out there. And it'll also sync back as well, which is quite nice. Nextcloud is kind of like Dropbox. So it's a file storage. So that's where the majority of my persistent volume storage ends up going. So I've got a load of stuff stored in there. I've got Harbor, which is a self-hosted Docker registry. So all the Docker images that I build myself for all the stuff that's on here goes into that. So I've got 2 repositories set up on there. One that's a public one that anybody can then pull from. So any of my public open source stuff automatically gets built to there. And then I've also got a private one for some of the stuff that I run like on my local machine and stuff like that, some of the more sensitive stuff. I've got a few other things. So I've got like Photo Prism, which is like a Google Photos alternative and that kind of thing. There's a few other stuff as well. I've also then got CI/CD tooling on there as well. So I run this project called Tecton, which is a Kubernetes native CI/CD. It's kind of like building blocks. So it's not necessarily a all singing, all dancing, packaged up CI/CD tool like Jenkins or anything like that. It is more the groundwork for building up your own CI/CD. So I've then gone and taken that base Tecton and built up a load of pipelines and stuff, all in code. When I say in code, mainly in YAML. That can then automatically trigger from a webhook when I push to Git to. So any of my repos that I update will automatically build a Docker image, publish it to Harbor, and do whatever. I'm happy to talk about that more if people are interested. And then I've got a whole bunch of what I call utility stuff. So just kind of hacks that make my life easier. So I've been doing a lot of 3D print stuff recently, and I've been getting into doing my own designy sort of stuff. And I like taking SVG logos and turn them into 3D things. And the app that I've got on the iPad that does this doesn't support SVG imports, which is annoying, but it does support DXF. So I've built a nice little app that I can just share an SVG to, and it will spit out a DXF. And I can do that just straight on the iPad, which is quite nice. And I've also got a Remarkable tablet, which is like an e-ink reader tablet thing. And I built a little thing where I can just send a website I can share a website to a URL, and it will automatically sync it to my my e-ink reader. So like blog posts and stuff, I can just read them later in a nice format. Yeah, and a few other things like that. So I think we take a quick break here, because I've gone through this quite quickly, but I wasn't really entirely sure what people wanted to focus on and what not. So I'm going to give a bit of overview. If anybody does have any questions or any areas they want me to dig into more or anything like that before I move on, now is the time.
Pick me.
Me!
Yeah, Sarah.
Questions.
Why?
To which bit?
All of it. Sorry. No, okay, so I'll guess.
Lacking of hobbies.
My actual question is what got you started on this journey and kind of decided to start it?
I don't think I did decide. I think it just kind of happened.
Sorry, Marcus, you might want to stop sharing your screen just so we can see each other on the stream.
Oh yeah, sorry.
I should definitely 100% be able to do that myself, but just questions.
Yeah, so it just kind of happened. I just keep buying devices, and they just keep accumulating. So I think kind of started off with probably the early Raspberry Pis and stuff, and those kind of things. So getting a collection of those, and then wanting more and other things. I think one day I kind of looked at my router and saw this whole massive list of IP addresses. Like, what the hell is all this stuff? So I started to have more rigor around it. I kept a spreadsheet with everything, and so that's kind of where the network side of things. The Kubernetes things just spun out from my day job. So I work with Kubernetes 24/7, pretty much. If I do it all day, I might as well carry on. I know how to use it. Yeah. Ryan, did you want to ask something?
Fine. I'm interested in. So obviously there's an element of satisfaction of building your own thing and maintaining it, as well as the utility of being able to make it do exactly what you want to do, which you don't often get from SaaS things when you're trying to cobble it together. I'm interested to know whether you feel like it's been worthwhile overall, just from a utilitarian point of view. And obviously the learning is definitely valuable.
Yes and no. So there's definitely been times where it's just been more of a pain than a blessing kind of thing. So I've definitely had times where things have just gone horrifically wrong, and I've then lost an entire evening trying to kind of rectify it. Like while I was doing this talk, I decided to upgrade my cluster, and one of the instances on Scaleway got stuck, and I couldn't detach a PVC from it. I actually ended up having to raise a support request with them to get it forcibly detached and instantly and all this kind of thing. But that ended up about 3 hours, I think, of my cluster in the cloud being down, only because that one PVC that was stuck happened to be for Harbor, which hosted all my Docker images. So none of those could launch. So yeah, one of the things that's now on my to-do list is to look at backups for persistent volumes. So yeah, it can be a bit of a pain, but again, from that, I've also got a learning opportunity, which is quite nice. But
yeah, I used to manage or have my own Myth TV, TV recording, podcast consuming thing, running on a home server, and I was much younger and I lived with a couple of people, and they definitely didn't appreciate me looping the same section of Transporter 3 as I tried to get VSync working. And but I became very attached to it because you built it yourself. There's something really nice about running the thing.
Yes, one of the really nice things is if something does bug me, I can just go in and change it. Like the custom built CCTV application that I've briefly mentioned came out of that. I was previously using some open source software that just didn't fit how I wanted it to work. So I just went, stop it, I'll just build something, and yeah, and then I can just keep tweaking it as I go along. When I find the weak points, I can
And we've had a couple of questions on the YouTube chat. So the first one from Adam asking about the power consumption. Is this something that you've noticed or you're concerned about?
No, not particularly. So for most of the devices, the smart home stuff, it's all pretty low usage. So most of the Zigbee stuff that I've got around is battery powered anyway. So that's not a huge concern. The main power suck really is the desktop machine I've got down here, and it's just a single machine. It's not a huge amount. In this 3-floor, 3-bedroom house that I've got, during winter, my electricity bill at the moment was, I think, around 70 to 80 pounds for the electricity. Yeah, take that how you want.
I like how grown up that we all are. We were just like, oh yeah, that's not bad.
Yeah, it's not something that I've kind of noticed spike up at any point. It's not something I'm concerned about at this point anyway. If I was to then run like a rack server in the house, maybe change my mind, but
perhaps you should invest in some more infrastructure for energy management tracking. Then you can be worried about it.
Funny you say that. Some of the smart stuff I've got actually does do that.
All right, okay, cool.
Monitors its usage. Yeah.
Cool. You're on it.
Do you have uninterrupted power supplies hooked up to anything?
No. So that's one of the things I do need to kind of get added. Luckily around here, the physical infrastructure that I've got in this because it's a new estate is pretty good. In the time we've lived here, I don't think we've had any issues whatsoever with power, so that's not been a problem. The only kind of electrical downtimes I've had was me causing it. So yeah, it's something I do want to get. So especially for the desktop machine, I want to get a small one for some of the Raspberry Pis as well. But it's fairly low on my list of priorities at the moment. Yeah, it's definitely something I want to get.
And we've got another question from Ed. Hi, Ed. How are you doing?
Hi, Ed.
Oh, man. So Ed says, fascinating. Are you thinking about moving your Home Assistant off the Raspberry Pi to your local micro Kubernetes instance?
Oh, I did think about it, and it feels like an absolute pain to do. Mainly because there's so much gone into because I've got so many different devices. They're all configured in a certain way and all this kind of thing. I'm not sure how cleanly I can migrate all of that stuff from one to another. Mm-hmm. A lot of it's because of if the Raspberry Pi's got a fixed IP set up, so everything kind of communicates to that quite nicely. Moving that, I may have to go around and reconfigure some things. There's also then the case of the Zigbee USB drive. I'd have to find some way of then mounting that into the Kubernetes pod. I'm pretty sure it's doable. I've just not bothered to look into it because the Raspberry Pi works perfectly fine for it. And it means then that at least if I screw up my cluster, doing, one of the crazy things that I normally do, at least my lights still turn on.
Great.
As one more question, like you said, you're running your own sort of open source versions of commercial software like Google Photos and Dropbox, and like this is kind of an extension to the why question. Do you also have a little bit of I want to move away from Google, I want to move away from evil companies doing evil stuff with my data?
That feeds very much into the removing Google Analytics bit that I was going to talk about. But yes, I have the past 2-3 years now. I've been trying to kind of move away from Google for one reason or another. It's not really worth going into. But yes, I do kind of want that more ownership over my own thing and more control over my own data and stuff. So Google Photos was the kind of last one. I'm still not entirely sold on Photo Prism that I've got. I haven't really found a solution that's as good as Google Photos, annoyingly, for a self-hosted version. But for everything else that I use, all the self-hosted solutions are great. I mean, I've got my own chat server that I use that with all my family that's self-hosted, so I can speak to my parents and my partner and stuff, all through a self-hosted encrypted chat that I host. I've got the Nextcloud for all my backups, document backups, and there's definitely an aspect of that I want to kind of move away from these big monopolistic cloud providers and that kind of thing.
Got to watch your words, Marcus. We're streaming on YouTube.
Yeah.
Easy.
Is there any flagged words that I need to be aware of?
Sam's also on YouTube as well. Hey, Sam. And he had a question about what cameras feed the CCTV system.
So the cameras are just kind of cheap. I can't remember what they're called now, off the top of my head. I'll drop a link later, but they're cheap, like 40 quid cameras that are then flashed with a custom firmware to remove all the, calling out to Chinese servers for the cloud provider stuff. So it then just turns them into like a local only mode, which is perfect for my use case. So they just connect over the local network. It pulls all into a single server. But yeah, I'll drop a link later, and I'll make sure I message it to Sam. So yeah.
Actually, I think you covered a lot of links. So your slides going to be shared? Or
they're online. So
nice.
yeah.
Oh, wicked.
Infrastructure matter.
Sorry.
Hosted on the infrastructure that we're talking about now.
Yeah.
Nice.
And a quick question, because you mentioned about the volume claims in Scaleway. Have you found that the tools that you're wanting to run in Kubernetes are like predominantly 12-factor? Like, are they easily migrated into Kubernetes, or have you had to do much to make them work?
So yes and no. For a lot of the third-party stuff, I've, for the most part, just taken let's go into Kubernetes terms. So there's a kind of a package tooling called Helm, which is like a mix of templating and packaging of applications. For most of the third-party stuff that I've got on there, I just use an already available Helm chart that somebody else has put together, and so it's all kind of ready to go for Kubernetes, which is nice. Not the case for everything. So some of the stuff I've had to kind of do myself, but all these kind of things they're already Dockerized and things. They're available to a Docker image. So there is some level of 12-factor in there. There's been a few occasions where I've had to put in a nasty hack to set some permissions of specific files when they're mounted, or actually copy some files because the file that it needed, like the config file, for example, was alongside other files, so I couldn't mount that particular one without blowing out the rest, that kind of thing. So there's been a few cases. And all the stuff that I build myself, I'm obviously building with that goal, that endpoint in mind anyway. So it's all built ready for that sort of thing. So it's not been a huge problem for the most part. But yeah, there's definitely some workarounds that can be put in. But
this whole
it was much harder when I was running it on the Raspberry Pi because of the whole having to make everything work on ARM and that kind of thing. So.
I wonder if that'll get easier now that Macs are switching over to ARM, or whether we'll see?
Yeah, so in the past year, I've even seen it improving. So there's been like the rise of ARM-based cloud instances that you can get. So the Graviton on AWS and some of the new whatever it is, and also what do they call it? Equinix, whatever they're called, do some ARM instances, which I've used in the past to do some ARM specific builds when I've not been able to cross compile them on my machine. Yeah, it's definitely becoming easier, and the M1s will hugely help towards that.
We've got another question in YouTube from Adam. Hey, Adam. What sort of monitoring and observability do you have for the applications? Not necessarily energy consumption, but whatever performance, uptime, or whatever metrics you might be interested in.
So that kind of will go into the third topic as well, with my replacements with Google Analytics. But on both clusters, I've got a stack of Loki, which does my log collections using Pomtail, and then into Grafana for visualization of either the metrics side of things, or it could support the logs as well in there. I've also got Prometheus in there for some of the actual metrics side of things. So if I do want to, so I've actually set up early today on my local cluster Prometheus with Prometheus Blackbox, so that I can monitor the uptime of various devices on my local network that I've been having a few connectivity issues with, so I can see if there's a pattern to them disconnecting and things like that. Loki, great. Grafana, great. Especially the latest version. So that's what allowed me to then replace Google Analytics. So spoiler for later.
So I've got a bit of a question. Sorry.
No,
Sorry. So you mentioned about previously using Doku, which is like Heroku kind of esque thing. And
yeah.
I was just wondering, like, I like the idea. I love Heroku, like just push up a thing, it deploys, that's your development workflow and things like that. I was wondering how you felt with the transition from Doku to your current approach. Do you still have that same, I chuck it and it works, or how does that work?
So I do now that I've got the whole CI/CD thing set up with Tecton, and I've actually put the work in to make it close enough to that. It's not quite as seamless as it was with Docker, where you just literally point to you do a git push and it just goes up and does everything for you. But you also got more control now than I did with Docker. So in terms of things like having multiple replicas and persistent storage and all that kind of thing, is a lot easier to manage that in Kubernetes than it was with Docker. And also there's that level of isolation that Kubernetes gives you that Docker didn't. So on Docker, it was just all these Docker containers running alongside each other on the host machine, which is fine for the sort of stuff I was running back then, but not so much these days when I've got all these different applications that could potentially tread on each other's toes and that kind of thing. So in terms of an actual transition from one to the other, it wasn't an easy transition. It was definitely I ran these things side by side for a while, and just for the most part started from scratch on each kind of thing I wanted. The stuff that I mainly had on Docker were hacks and stuff that we did at RenderComp for NotJSOxford and that kind of thing. It was all these little kind of apps that didn't necessarily need all the big infrastructure stuff around it, whereas now I'm running a lot more stuff that has other stuff.
Yeah. Sorry, Gabor, did I cut you off there? Were you asking something?
Oh, it was just a favorite bash. It's the I've lost my machine. I literally lost it. Responds to ping, works completely. I just can't figure out where in my apartment it is.
I 100% had that many times. Yeah. That's what led me to having all these named things. I've now got a document with, this is that thing, and a bit of a description as well as to what the purpose of it is, what OS it's running, and that kind of thing. Yeah, so if I see a particular IP on my network being a bit weird, I can look at this, see, okay, it's running on a Raspberry Pi, it's got, CentOS installed. Okay, I can SSH in with these credentials. Great.
Oh, there's a tool in Datadog, I think, and probably a bunch of others, where you can actually visualize the network as traffic flows through it. And then I think you can also hover over the different nodes, and then certain information about them can also be displayed. Do you have a dashboard like that?
No, because of the stuff that I've got running in my local cluster here is fairly small and self-contained compared to the various devices that go around the network. Having that kind of map isn't hugely useful for me because for the most part they're fairly isolated different devices. It's mostly the smart home stuff, so I've got that visibility through Home Assistant that I need. For the stuff on my cloud cluster, each of those applications are kind of self-contained. They don't really interact with others. So every application I've got installed on there is in its own namespace and it's just got the stuff that it needs. So for example, like the logging stuff, the low-key, all that low-key Grafana stuff is all in one namespace and then just trails the logs of the others. Whereas then like my blog is in its own namespace and doesn't talk to anything else. So I don't really have a use in what I'm doing for that kind of graph because I don't have microservice architecture with this sort of stuff.
Are you afraid of someone from the internet kind of breaching your private network and going hopping through different devices and then connecting to your whatever
yes
things in your
yes
kitchen?
And no. Yeah, so I mean it's always a concern with anything, and if you connect anything to the internet, it's a concern really. I've put enough, I think, steps in place to at the very least make it more difficult, so hopefully it's not worth somebody's time. If somebody was really determined to specifically break into my stuff, they probably could, but that's true of any system to an extent. But I've done to the best of my abilities. There's always more to learn, I guess, but yeah.
Cool.
So you've got your local Kubernetes cluster and the hosted one. Do you think you'll move over to just having it in the cloud or just having it more locally, or if you got a separation for that?
No, yeah, it's definitely a separation. The stuff that I've got on this local one is very much stuff that I want running here. So it is like the CCTV access stuff, the stuff that needs to speak to things on my local LAN, or things that I just don't want kind of exposed on the internet for whatever reason. Stuff that I'm maybe not entirely sure is secure, for example, or stuff that I may not particularly trust or whatever, that kind of thing, or even just stuff that I want to be able to access my local drives here, so that I can then, with the downloaders, I can then just have it ready on my local storage network. But yeah, I've been moving more and more stuff up to the cloud, and having as much as I can there. So, yeah.
I guess that's a really nice thing about these open source technologies, that we can self-host or use SaaS versions, because if you decide that you want to host it in the cloud, your deployment model is the same. You're just pointing it at a different cluster rather than having to completely change the way you do it. Yeah,
and the neat thing about having it all done with Kubernetes is I can quite easily then move that to another cloud provider if I wanted to. And for the most part, there've been no changes that I need to make. There'll be a little bit in terms of like persistent volumes and how they're handled, but I could within a day probably pick up all the stuff that I've got for my current cluster in Scaleway and move it over to AWS without too much of a hassle.
Have you thought about applying for a job at Parler?
Yeah.
For those watching this was a joke.
I think
it sounds like their infrastructure needs are way beyond. I mean, they need like an Nginx server, and
I heard that Parler were moving to 4 Seasons because apparently they do terraforming.
Oh, very good. Very good.
Bam.
It's actually a nice segue, because you mentioned Terraform, Marcus. for everyone on the call, would you like to just talk a little bit about how you use it and what it's for and why it's great?
Yeah, sure. So for any that's kind of watching that doesn't know what Terraform is, it's a way of describing your infrastructure as a type of code. So you can have what all your instances and stuff will look like in code in this Terraform format. And I use that, as I said, for both of my clusters actually. So for my local cluster, it mainly just uses a wrapper around the Kubernetes manifest files, so the YAML files, so that it just kind of tracks the state a bit better. So I can handle deletions and stuff nicer than Kubernetes does natively without Helm. And then for my cloud-based stuff, it actually brings up the capsule managed Kubernetes. It brings up the instances, the S3-esque buckets, their objects or whatever they call them on there as well, and that kind of thing. And again, all the stuff in the cluster as well, so all the YAML and the Helm charts and stuff, it's all in Terraform. So that means that then I can just run a Terraform apply, and it'll make sure that my infrastructure looks how my code looks. So it'll make sure that any changes that need to be made get made, and I can then commit that in. And if I've ever done something wrong, I can roll back a git commit and go back to how it was, which is very nice. It also means that when I kind of go and remove something, and then a month later, like I actually needed that, I can hop back and pick it back out again, which I've done a few times.
That sounds really neat. So let me get this straight. So your Terraform will effectively run the Helm charts that you've got. So if you just run one command, you'll get the whole thing. Is that right?
Kind of. So I've actually got this thing called a Helm operator running in my Kubernetes cluster. So in Kubernetes, an operator is a type of pattern where it will be able to work on resources and do operations to make sure they stay in sync. So it kind of extends the basic Kubernetes functionality. So this Helm operator, what it does, it allows you to submit a custom resource into Kubernetes that is a Helm release. And that basically defines a Helm chart with the values that you want. And then that Helm operator makes sure that all the correct stuff gets installed for you. So all I'm actually doing is getting Terraform to tell the operator what to go and install. So that then also means that if I make any changes on the fly in the cluster, the operator will come along and go, hold on a minute, that doesn't match anymore, I'm going to fix it. So I'm a huge fan of operators in Kubernetes. I've wrote a few myself for personal stuff and for work and stuff, and it's very useful.
I realised we stopped for a short break in questions about 3 days ago.
We have got one more question from YouTube that, and then before we move on. But Adam just asked one more thing, which was like, when we were talking about security, have you ever considered adding a honeypot to your internal network? I think Adam might be sizing you up. Just warning you here.
Yeah, kind of. So part of the discussion me and Ben had on Twitter was a little bit around this. I'm not sure that honeypots are actually legal in the UK to run one.
Really?
I don't think so. I think because it's entrapment. If I remember correctly, UK law is against. I'm not a lawyer. I'm not a cat. So yes and no. The discussion I was having with Ben kind of around this is one of the things that I use my analytics for is to find out what bots are scraping my websites and what nasty stuff they're trying to do. Any of that stuff that I find, I stick onto what I'm calling a filter routes on my site that just leaves them hanging and just doesn't respond to their network requests. So another bot will come along, it'll do the network request, and it'll hang there until their timeout is reached. So at the very best, I'm hopefully slowing them down. Makes it kind of slightly more of a pain for them. Whether that helps in the long run or not, don't know. But
Doesn't that also exhaust your network ports open? Or?
Yeah, but my stuff isn't popular enough to be a worry. The amount of visitors I get in one go is single digits, maybe. I've got plenty to spare.
When we were chatting about this, I was really enjoying the idea that, like you said, a lot of the bots were about like the WordPress login thing. And I really like the idea that
Yeah.
bots just want to write blog posts, right? Like they just want to be heard.
They just want to get their voice out there.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's like what it's like to be a robot on the internet, but yeah.
Yeah. And the one that I've seen creeping up a lot recently is looking for .env files exposed.
Ooh.
So yeah, make sure they're not on your web host anywhere. And if they are, they're explicitly ignored by Nginx and all that kind of thing. So yeah, I've seen lots of those popping up in the past couple of weeks. Yeah. Cool. Do we want to move on to the next section? Yes.
Sounds good.
All right. Bear with. So, the next section I've got is smart home. So I've talked a lot about this already in the preceding stuff. So I may go through this a bit quickly because I'm a bit conscious of time as well. I imagine there's going to be a bit of questions around this area. So yeah, feel free to just put them in the chat as we go, as you think of them, and I can get to them later. So as I've already mentioned, I've got Home Assistant running centrally that controls all the devices in my house. And that's a combination of Zigbee and Wi-Fi devices. So I'm not expecting you to actually be able to see it, but the diagram on the right there is a map of my Zigbee devices. So that's the interactions between each of them at the time that I took that image yesterday, I think it was. So you see, it kind of works as a mesh, and they pass messages to each other to kind of send, to control a device at the edge. Somewhere in the middle will pass the message on. Within my house, I've got an Amazon Echo pretty much in every room except for the bathrooms. This is the one area where kind of security and privacy thing kind of is a bit, yeah, but I like being able to control things with my voice. So yeah. Most rooms in the house also have some form of smart lighting, whether that's the ceiling bulbs I've got above me, some floor lamps or desk lamps, or some form of LED strip. So in this room alone, I've got 3 different LED strips and a smart bulb above me, all that I can control centrally. In the kind of throughway area, so the hallway, the landing, the kitchen in the house, I've got motion and light sensors. So it's a combined motion and light sensor that'll kind of think about yay big. That's just up in the corner of the room that I can use to trigger turn the lights on and off. And they're little Zigbee ones, so they're battery powered and work a treat. I've also got some outdoor lighting that's done with just some fairly cheap LED strips. And again, some motion and light sensors there. So I've got above my front door, I've got kind of an archway sort of thing. So I've got some lights there with a little sensor, and again over the garage, I've got the same. So it means that if I need to go out at any point, don't have to worry. And then throughout the house, I've got a whole bunch of kind of cheap and old Android tablets that I use as dashboards for Home Assistant. So I've got a specific dashboard pretty much set up for each of these rooms. So I've got one right in front of me here in the office that I've got set up that's got controlling all the things in the office. I can then switch to control other bits of the house as well, all from this little tablet while I'm still doing work or whatever. So I can control all the lights that I've got here. I can see a calendar on here, and I can control my 3D printer and all this kind of thing. And similarly through the house, I've got like one near the front door that allows me to control light outside, and also display the camera that I've got outside the front door and that kind of thing. So rather than kind of explaining all these devices and going through it, what I thought I would do is kind of take you through a typical day that I have and how I interact with all the devices in my house through that day. That's a bit of a stretch of a typical day in the current climate, but bear with me. So generally speaking, I'll wake up at 5 a.m. Because I'm very much an early bird, and I'll be woken up by my watch vibrating, saying, get up out of bed. So my partner then can sleep in till gone midday or whatever it needs to be without disturbing her. Now, I roll over and I'll take my phone off charge, and as soon as I do that, if it's a work day, the lights in my office will automatically turn on along with my monitor ready for me. So this is where I go back to using the Home Assistant app on my phone. It means then that I can also use some sensors on my phone as inputs to some of the automations. So as soon as it stops charging in a particular time span in the morning, I can then trigger these lights to come on in my office. I'll then walk downstairs, go through the landing, down to the hallway into the kitchen. And because it's early in the morning and I'm still groggy and stuff, the lights will come on at only 20% brightness. So I don't get a nice blinding light as I come into these rooms. So I'll walk down. I go into the kitchen, get myself a drink, and again, the light in the kitchen automatically turns on at 20% brightness. I can see my drink, I can do what I need to do. And again, I still wake up kind of without a jolt. I then go through to the living room, tap on the little tablet that I've got there. So the living room is one of the few kind of communal places where we don't have motion sensors for the lights, because it's a sort of place where you'll either want them on for a more prolonged period and you maybe just sat on the sofa for a few hours or whatever. So you don't want them kind of going on and off. So that's one of the areas where we either control them through voice using the Amazon Echo, or a little tablet we've got by the door that can control all the lights. So I'll tap the little to the sofa lamp on that we've got, the nice in the corner. So again, not too bright. And the next thing I'll do is I'll open the back door to let the dog out. And as soon as I open that door, the lights in the gardens, I've got an LED strip along the fence that'll light up so that the dog can see out in the garden. I can see she's not going out there to, dig up or whatever, especially during these winter nights. That's very, very useful. That's, I haven't mentioned this, but that's done using little open door or window sensors. So on the door, little sensor, again, opens that, triggers an automation in Home Assistant. So then becomes time to actually get some work done. So I come back to my office, start typing away. Check my calendar for the morning, and I see that I've got no meetings. So I decide it's a good day to set off my 3D printer, because it's a bit noisy. So if I have any important calls that day, I'll generally avoid it. Not always, because it's not too bad. But yeah, I'll set off my 3D printer. So I've got this little tablet that I've got in front of me. Like I said, turn my 3D printer on. It'll automatically turn it on with a smart plug. It'll then connect automatically through that Octopi on the Raspberry Pi to connect to the printer, and it will trigger it to preheat. So it'll heat up ready for me. Then I can just go to the web page and select whatever I want to print. So it's a nice little list of models I've already added. Click the one I want, off it goes, and I can just then leave it. So sometime later in the day, I'll have a look at the CCTV app that I've got to check what the dog's doing downstairs. She's been quiet for a while. It's not usually a good sign, so I just want to make sure she's not, ate the sofa. It's all good. So it's fine. I can just have a look. A bit later on, I'll head down to the kitchen for a snack. I didn't open the curtains this morning, so it's still actually dark in the kitchen when I go in. Open the door, and seeing it's now middle of the day, so it's not early in the morning, the lights will come on at full 100% brightness, and the lamp that I've got in there will also turn on. So I've got a nice bright kitchen in there. Okay, fast forward to lunchtime. Again, I head down for food, but this time the lights don't come on because I remembered to open the curtains. There's enough natural light in there that we don't need to have those lights turn on. While I'm eating, whatever I was doing on my 3D printer has finished. I will get a notification on my phone to say that it's ready, it's done. In the back door, go to open the front door, and again, all lights up as soon as the door's opened, and will automatically turn off a few minutes later when we're out. When returning back, the same lights will come on automatically when we get close to the little sensor, so that I can see, I can see the keyhole nice and easily. I can get in without any faffing about. Comes to dinner time. So cooked up a nice meal, family's off elsewhere in the house, wait for some to cook. Tell the Echo that I've got in the kitchen to set a 20-minute timer for whatever I'm cooking, and then off I go and can leave it in the oven. So the timer sounds, go back in the kitchen, plate everything up, get it on the table, tap a little button on another of the tablets. All the Echoes in the room then set off an announcement to let the family know that dinner is ready and for them to come down to the kitchen. A bit later on, it's time for my daughter to go to bed. If she's in there, the lights that I've got a little LED strip around her bed. It'll flash briefly just to let her know it's bedtime. So if she isn't already ready, she can get ready. And also she's got some LED strips underneath her bed that will light dimly and stay on all night, so that if you need to get up in the middle of the night for the toilet, she doesn't have to fumble about, which is very nice. So now it's my bedtime, best time of the day. While getting ready for bed, I can check on my phone, you know, while I'm getting changed, or go to the toilet, whatever. Check Home Assistant on my phone and make sure that everything is turned off. And if not, I can just toggle it off from there. So, you know, did I leave the garden light on? Turn it off. Did I leave the kitchen lights on? Turn them off. Most of these stuff will turn off automatically anyway after a bit of period of inactivity. But if I've turned them on through manual means, they will stay on until I turn them off. One of the things that I've got set up around this is the garden lights, for example. In the evening, if they're left on for longer than, I think it's about 30 minutes or something like that, they will automatically turn off anyway. So if we do forget to leave them, if we do forget them overnight, they won't just stay on all night and annoy the neighbors, which is nice. So then we're in bed, and just roll over and say softly to Echo, turn off the lights, and then darkness, and I can fall to sleep. Very nice. So that's a typical day for me. It doesn't touch all the devices that I've got, but I feel like it's a good journey through majority of the stuff that I've got. It kind of gives an insight to the automations that I use and the different devices that I use and that kind of thing. If people have questions, I can dig into more of this stuff a bit later. Before I go on to that, I know there was something that Adam asked me about previously that I want to cover, so that's security. So with IoT stuff and all the smart home stuff, security is a big problem. A lot of these little devices you get are woefully insecure. And as people say, the S in IoT stands for security. So where possible, all these devices that I've got, as I said, there are a lot of cheap little things I like to tinker with. So I tend to flash them with custom firmware if possible, like I have with the CCTV cameras, so that it makes them work in a local only mode and they don't talk out to the internet in any way. And I block off the internet access as much as possible with that. So at least they're not kind of reaching out to some Chinese servers to then, you know, run whatever. Any sort of unnecessary network traffic, at least from a DNS level, is blocked by AdGuard that I mentioned earlier. So that's things like going off to a few of the AWS analytics endpoints and things like that. It'll all get blocked by AdGuard quite nicely. The firewall on my local router, both the ISP's one that I've got downstairs and the router I've got in here, so like double firewall, obviously better, blocks all incoming ports. Incoming, so you know, nothing can come in on port 80 or whatever. It all has to be an outgoing port that set up the connection. As I mentioned briefly, the Amazon Echoes. I trust Amazon enough that they're secure. Whether they respect my privacy enough, I don't know, but the family likes them. Voice is good. Yeah, that's one of the areas where there's no really good alternative that's kind of self-hosted and local only and all that kind of thing. As I mentioned earlier, the secure access to my local services, so for Home Assistant, for example, and my 3D printer, it's all done through this tunnel I've got set up with my cloud cluster, with then an authenticated endpoint in front of it. So you have to get through that first to get even to the tunnels and then get into my local network. And that's only set up for specific paths and stuff as well. So yeah, it's not like they've got carte blanche access to my whole LAN network. So yeah, it's definitely one of the considered areas, and it is one of the things that I kind of try and keep an eye on, especially with, you know, monitoring all the different IPs that I've got on my network and looking for obscure devices popping up and weird activity and that kind of thing. A few kind of MISC stuff that I can't really fit into the walkthrough. So I've got an automation that handles that brightness thing that I mentioned. So in Home Assistant, I use a plugin that allows me to kind of like set variables that I can then reuse. So I've got an automation that based on the time of the day, it'll set that variable to either 20% for the dim brightness or 100% for later on. I use a similar thing for the volume of the Amazon Echoes as well. So that, you know, when we're talking to them either early in the morning or at night or whatever, they don't like blast really loudly, especially my daughter's one that she likes to play loud music on. So it's good that, you know, in the evening or early morning, that's not waking the whole house, which it has done in the past. The Home Assistant app is super useful for getting notifications. So on most of the external doors and the gate and the garage and things that we've got outside, we've got sensors to you know, door open close sensors on them. And if they're left open for, I think for the most of them, I've got it set like 5-10 minutes sort of thing, I'll get a notification to tell me so. So if I forget to close the garage for whatever reason, I get a notification to say, go and sort that out. I've also got similar notifications that if we're away for whatever reason, any of these sort of stuff turns on, if we are away holiday or whatever, and something turns on by motion or whatever, I'll get a notification by that, and I can check in on the CCTV cameras and all that sort of stuff. As I've already mentioned, most of the lights do turn off automatically after a period of time. So with the hallway, landing, kitchen, that kind of thing, that's like after 5 minutes of no motion being seen. Garden is similarly, when the door closes, like 5 minutes later, it turns off. As I said, I've got some tablets around the house. So I've got one in here, one in the hallway, one in the kitchen, and one in the living room that can then control kind of everything in the house through bespoke custom dashboards. I've also got some that's set up specifically for my phone and my partner's phone and my daughter's phone, so they can control their specific things. So again, that's kind of a whistle-stop tour of my smart home stuff. So I've seen the chats kind of going through, so we'll take a quick break and see what people want to know more about.
I've got a question.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of questions.
Yeah, Ryan, go.
In fact, I don't really have a question.
You just wanted to beat me.
You just want to be center of attention.
I do have a question though.
No, I do really. The 3D printer that you've got with I thought that walkthrough of what a day with a smart home is just so nice for painting the picture of the power of that. Have you thought about tying your 3D printer to your work calendar so that you could have it print in Slack in downtime and just pause a couple of minutes before your meeting starts?
So I could, but that would mean that I'd have to plan ahead as to what I'm going to be printing, which I don't always do. I kind of just think, oh, I want to print a Bulbasaur model today, so I'll load that up. I've got to the point now where I'm just printing random bits here and there, little models and stuff. But one of the things I've been using it for a lot recently is in conjunction with some of the smart home stuff that I've been tinkering with. I've been creating kind of mounts and project boxes and stuff. So for the LED strips that I've got kind of around here, they're all powered off little ESP8266 boards. So I've got little 3D printed boxes for those to fit in nicely. I've got some mounts on my shelving so that some LED strips can be angled down to display little models that I've got and things like that. But again, the printer I've got, so I've had it upgraded. I've had the motherboard upgrade on it. It's actually a lot quieter than when I got it. So it's not huge. I mean, Sarah will be able to tell you, it's not a huge distraction for the most part on calls these days. I mean, most of the time I don't even know that I've got it running.
We usually hear Fox more than the 3D printer.
She is quite nosy.
What printer do you have?
Ender 3 Pro, and I highly recommend it.
I have a question.
Yep.
So you mentioned the Echo Dots and how you're unsure about them. Do you think if a good alternative came out, you would be tempted to move away from Amazon?
Yeah, probably. It would have to pass the family test first.
Yeah.
They use it much more than I do. I mean, my predominant use for it is just turning the lights off in bed, which is super lazy. But yeah, if something came along that could understand my daughter's weird questions that she ends up asking, yeah, I think if you could pass that test, yeah. For the time being, yeah. I mean, we've got, like I said, we've got them in every room. So we've got 2 of the Echo shows. So in my office, I've got one of the shows, and Chloe's got one in her bedroom with a little screen on, which is quite nice. The rest are just Echo Dots spread around, and they're all ones that we've got well on sale as well. So they're like 25 quid, I think, for the Dots on sale, and then 40, I think, for the show on sale, something like that. Yeah, well, I don't think I'd pay full price for them. So they're constantly on sale. So get them on sale if you want to get some.
Have you tried the Google and the Apple ones?
Yeah, I haven't tried the Apple one. I had the Google Home Mini when it was first available over here. The sound quality and stuff on it was brilliant. The actual Google Assistant, I couldn't get on with. It just didn't do anywhere near as, at least at the time, didn't do anywhere near as much as the Echo that I already had. So yeah, I just chose to go the Echo route. I think the Google one's better these days, but I haven't tried it since.
Thinking about where we might go with, like Sarah was saying, with the open source one, there's such a huge barrier because it's not just like doing speech recognition or having a framework around it. The hardware as well, and it all needs to integrate.
So in terms of hardware and like an open source version, there are a few out there, but it's the whole machine learning side of things and the natural language processing and stuff that they're just completely lacking, because you need that. You either need a huge data set that all these calculators have, or you need the huge processing power to be able to do it quickly. And yeah, it's just not there yet, unfortunately. Yeah.
To bring in some questions from YouTube while we were chatting, there's a few things that came through. There's a lot of chat about any tips on how to wake up at 5 a.m. in the morning, and a bit of chat about that. Like people want to
go to bed early.
All right, cool. That's obvious.
I'm generally in bed between 9 and 10. So
yeah.
Cool.
Wait, 10 o'clock and you're still getting up at 5?
Yeah,
I don't sleep much to begin with. I'm often up much earlier than 5. Yeah, so there'll be a lot of times where I'll start work at like 3 a.m. because I just couldn't sleep.
There is, I can confirm.
Yeah.
Wow.
Don't take sleep advice from me.
Cool. Yeah, cool. Adam, I hope that don't take advice. But, that's cool.
Yeah.
And I've got a question on DM from Jamie, which just before I ask it, I want to check. Are you wearing headphones? All right. Then this question isn't probably gonna make much difference to you. But the question is, Alexa, turn off all the lights. No.
It wouldn't. So it wouldn't have worked anyway. I've changed the wake word.
All right. Oh well. I hope that answers your question, Jamie.
Was it not Echo? Turn all the lights off.
Is it computer?
Okay. Cool. Nice. And then there's also been some chat about fashion and ducks. I'm not quite sure if I've been following that.
It's the unofficial dress code of JS, not maybe Oxford.
Oh, my t-shirt. Oh, yeah.
Of plaid shirts and duck goose tops.
So yeah, it's going down well. So. Oh wait, are we talking about a plaid goose shirt as a combo of a duck short shirt? That makes sense.
Throw some eggs in there, and we're on to a winner.
Well, ducks lay eggs.
Cool. Right. So I had some more. So that flow, I'm going to echo Ryan and say, like, you taking us through what your day was is a really great way of showing how that works. It's like super interesting. All the kind of like how much of that flow is set up through the Home Assistant app? Is it all 100%. That? Like 100%. Cool. Nice.
Yeah, so the Home Assistant is kind of the brains of it. So that handles all the automation side of things. So the triggers from the sensors, the motion sensors, the door sensor, whatever, that triggers an automation in Home Assistant that then turns things on and off. Same with the dashboards as well. The tablets, they're all displaying the UI of Home Assistant.
Nice, that's super interesting. I really need to check out Home Assistant. And so, so when you kind of like say you've got your LED lights above you, or wherever they are, did you have to do anything special to kind of like hook those in, or is that a feat? Is Home Assistant like flexible to other things, or what?
So it's got hundreds of integrations you can get with it. Most of the stuff that I've got it actually connects to Home Assistant through MQTT.
All right, okay, wicked.
Yeah, which I know you're very keen on, Ben.
So
all my Zigbee stuff is done through MQTT. So all those devices do MQTT topics, and then Home Assistant watches and responds and updates those topics to interact with things.
Okay.
Similarly, the ESP8266 things that I've set up, they use a project. The ones that I've just set up recently, they use a project called WLED, which is very cool. It allows you to do really cool like effects and stuff. And there's a integration for Home Assistant specifically for that, and allows you to quite nicely do it. Whole bunch of other stuff as well. Like I said, there's hundreds and hundreds of different things that you've never even heard of on there. It's fantastic.
That's super cool.
Yeah.
And now I
really liked the idea of it letting you know when you've done things wrong as well. Like my car tells me when I've left it unlocked. But every night we do the same thing. We walk up to the front door and the back door and check that we've locked them. And the idea of just being told. Also, we may have left the front door open overnight when we went over to visit my parents one time, and it would have solved that. So
yeah,
there's lots of ways it can make.
I love that kind of thing. So, like I said, we've got a mode that we can turn on like when we're away. So it's not on all the time, but we turn on when we're away. That it will let us know if there's activity in the house that's not meant to be there. So lights turning on or sensors detecting things, that sort of thing. Yeah, pretty cool. Cool. Do I have time to very quickly go on to the analytics stuff?
Yeah.
It is quite short, so yeah. Sweet. Hopefully a lot of this will kind of be tied into some of the stuff I've already talked about anyway. So yeah, this is kind of initially what the discussion me and Ben had started around. So sometime last year, and towards the end of last year, I finally managed to take Google Analytics off my website and replace it with this solution that I've cobbled together. A few reasons kind of why I wanted to do this. For anybody that's used Google Analytics, there's a whole lot of stuff in there that I haven't got a clue what it's for. Seeing as I'm not running like an e-commerce thing, I'm not trying to generate money from my site or anything. I just kind of want to know, are people looking at it? I didn't use 99% of the stuff that was in Google Analytics, so it was wasted on me. As I already mentioned kind of previously, I have been trying to de-Google myself to some extent. So I've stopped using things like Gmail, Google Photos. I no longer have an Android phone, which is a bit weird for me, but yeah, it's slowly going there. So I thought I maybe should do that same thing for my website visitors. So I don't want to kind of put the burden on them as well for their data to be hoarded by Google. And for anybody that's kind of worked in web long enough, you'll probably find out eventually that client-side analytics are flaky at best. When I previously worked in the ecom team at work, the analytics that we saw versus the access logs that we had from our servers, we saw that the analytics were only giving us about 50% of the actual users that we were getting. So half of our users were either blocking those analytics some way, they were breaking in some way, or something was stopping those analytics from reporting those as users. So we're only actually getting half of the picture. And all I really wanted to know was, what of my blog posts are popular and when, am I actually writing anything? I don't write much to begin with, but am I writing anything that people care about? As we've already mentioned, what bots are trying to do naughty things, and how can I stop them, and can I just get a bit more information about it? And is anything throwing an error code? So am I getting any 500 errors that I'm not aware of, and that sort of thing? For the most part, that's all I really care about. So to replace Google Analytics, I was leveraging a lot of stuff that I'd already kind of got, and I've already talked about in the previous section. So the solution that I got was using a thing called Traffic, Loki, and Grafana. So for those that don't know, Traffic is an ingress controller. It's the one I use in my cloud Kubernetes cluster. So that handles every incoming web request. It handles every incoming HTTP web request to my cloud cluster for all of my domains, for all of the applications in there. And it logs all those HTTP requests out in a JSON format with all the kind of metadata and stuff that's kind of nicely parsable and stuff. because that's just going out to a log file, then that then gets picked up and collected by Loki, which gets all the logs from all my applications, not just the traffic access logs, but all of them, gets them all together, stores them, and makes them queryable in a very nice fashion that I can then use Grafana to query that data, do searches or lists, and create a dashboard from that information. So an example of what, I don't expect you to be able to see all this, but an example of what an access log looks like is for my blog. This is Google bot requesting the CSS for the main page of my website. And that's what all this information is explained. There's a lot of duplication here because of the way that the logs are collected and then formatted and parsed and all this kind of thing. Don't need most of this data, but having it in this nice JSON format means that I can then go and play with the data as much as I need and pull out the bits that I need and do queries and have it nicely parsed. So I then take this, pipe it through Loki, pipe it into Grafana, and create something that looks like this. So this is the dashboard that I use for my website. You'll see here, I don't expect you to be able to see all the little details again. This is just a big view, as is what I view on my nice big widescreen monitor, so I can see all of this in nice one screen. Let's break it down a bit though. Up in the top left, these two panels here give me kind of a quick overview of the time period that I'm looking at. So at the top, I can see the different types of requests that I've had, so the different type of responses that I've had based on their status code and how many I've had in total, along with the graph of kind of when that happened over time and what status codes. There's a different color there for each of the status codes, and the spikes obviously is how many of each of those at that time. Then this is the one that I'm kind of mostly interested in when I'm writing new blog posts, as to what's actually been popular. So this will show me the top pages for that site. So this filters out any requests for assets, anything that failed, anything that was a bot trying to scrape. This is just the pages that I actually know about. So these are on here. It's the index of my website, which is obviously going to be high, the RSS feed, and then my posts on reasonable alternatives and moving to iOS. So that kind of gives me information about what people or bots are seeing over this sort of time. I then want to look at kind of where this traffic's coming from. So all the referrers that are coming in on these requests. So whether it's coming from Google, Twitter, DuckDuckGo, all got Baidu and all this kind of thing, I've kind of got it here. So for the ones that I kind of know about and hit regularly, so things like Twitter, Google, Facebook, that sort of thing, I've actually got a rule set up in this dashboard to actually just rename all those URLs with the actual name of the service. You can see here Twitter and Google is already rewrote. The other things that I don't see as often just comes through as the URL, and I can, if I start seeing more and more of those, I can add more if I want to. I've then got what pages am I missing? So these are all the 404s that my site is reporting. So I can look in here and say, oh, hold on a minute, I've got a link that's pointing to so-and-so that's not actually there, either something that I've done wrong or whatever. A lot of the time, sorry, this ends up being bots just trying to scrape things. So this here is looking for a tag somewhere. I don't have tags on my site, so don't know where that's come from. But this is where I see things like the WP admin URLs and the .ends and stuff and that sort of thing. So I'll look in here regularly, pick these out and add them to that filters route that I mentioned earlier, and try and block those requests. So a bunch of other stuff on here as well that's not hugely important. So I've got down at the bottom left, it displays all the requests. I've got the amount of the requests that have done a redirect, so that I can kind of see what pages we just immediately redirecting into another, so I can maybe improve that a bit for performance, and yeah, that kind of thing. So the nice thing about having this in Grafana and in Loki and using traffic in my Kubernetes cluster is I can actually then make this dashboard work for all of my sites within Kubernetes. All right, so all of those sites are based on a request header, so it's the URL that those sites are requested on. So for this, for example, it's my website, marcusnoble.co.uk. In this dashboard, I've got a little drop down here, and I can switch that to any of the others and see this same dashboard with the data for those sites as well. If I really wanted, I can see the data for all of them in one dashboard, but that would be noisy and not really tell me much because they're not really related. Let me just switch back to the one with that thing. So there's also in the top right corner here as well. I can change the time frame that this is viewing as well. So I can generally it just shows the last 24 hours. So I just kind of check it every now and again. But I can pick particular times of day, particular blocks of time. So if, for example, I've released a new blog post and I want to see how that's done over a particular progression curve or whatever, I can look at that. If I know that my blog post has been in a weekly newsletter or something, I can see that relationship as well. And I've also got it, some of these items are linked as well to the actual queries underneath. So for example, the request in the top left, I can click on those and it will show me the actual raw log files that it's passed that query out from, which is quite nice for me to then go and improve the dashboard. So if something looks a bit weird, I can just go under the hood and change the query and add to the query and change things. So it's again going back to the whole tinkering nature that I liked with the hardware and stuff that I can then bring into this. I suppose that's really it. That dashboard kind of gives me the information that I need as opposed to Google Analytics. So it's quite sparse. Like I said, there's not a whole lot that I personally want to see out of these analytics. There's definitely more that I could put in there, but there's definitely stuff that I can't put in there. So if, for example, you need any information about your user's browser configuration, not just the user agent, which I can get, but the screen size, the whatever, you're not going to get that through this solution. You're going to then have to have some at client side that picks all this information up. As all I care about is kind of the raw numbers of users, parsing these nicely formatted access logs is, perfectly useful for my benefit. That's it.
Me first.
Yeah.
From what I understand, you build this yourself, right?
I hooked all this together. So all of those tools that I mentioned, they are off-the-shelf things. So that Traffic is a very popular ingress controller. It was the default, I think it was the default one with Kubernetes Capsule when I got it with Scaleway. That just handles all the network requests. Loki is then a project from the Grafana team that is basically, they dub it as Prometheus for logs. So it handles logs, log collection and log querying in the same sort of way as Prometheus does with metrics. And then Grafana is the project that then can display data and query data.
Yeah.
The actual dashboard itself, yes, I pulled that all together from the data that I've got. So I built the queries and that, but yeah.
Have you ever thought of, making or turning that into like something commercial, or would that be just noise in your life at this point?
Yeah, probably not, because the way that I've got it currently, it's fairly linked to how I've got everything else set up. So for this particular thing to work, you'd have to be running in Kubernetes. You'd have to have Traffic set up and configured to do their access logs as JSON, and there's a whole bunch of things you'd have to get in place. It's not really a one package thing. It's bringing these things together.
Yeah.
And like I said, those queries, they look fairly generic, but a lot of them are very tailored to the information that I personally want to see. So those some of those requests widgets filter out bits of information that I know I don't care about, for example. So like some of the top requests, I only care about if it's a HTML page or a direct, a pretty URL directory or an XML. That may not be the case for other applications. So like if you've got a REST API that responds with .json or whatever, that won't work for you. But it's something you can then tweak.
Yeah. The reason I'm asking is because the last place where I worked, we already had Traffic and Loki and Grafana and all of the services that are the building blocks that are feeding data into this dashboard, but there was no well, I guess we used Datadog and Grafana and something else which I no longer remember. Doesn't matter.
So it's definitely like it's not a packageable thing. It's more I could provide the walkthrough for how to set it up. It's a tutorial more than anything. If you have those bits in place, linking them together is relatively straightforward.
Or pay you to do that for them.
You could throw money at me if you want. Kind of evening, Marcus. It's a really interesting thing though, because like in government we have a ton of little services that we ship, and a lot of them have Google Analytics because it's easy and it's rich, and we often don't think about the privacy or the potential privacy implications of pushing that cookie onto someone's browser. And the really hard sell of not using Google Analytics is the barrier to getting something that's meaningful. So even like just seeing that and going, well, it can show us what pages and how, like when we see things and how many errors we get and what things people are requesting but not getting. If you had that and you could just go, well, this is what we get by default, it's an easier sell than just like, well, you've got Google Analytics or bake something yourself.
So I'd gone through a fair few different options kind of prior to this. Kind of like you said, I went with Google Analytics because it was the easiest to just throw it in, it's there. And it was kind of, it's better to collect more data than not enough. But then you kind of go into Google Analytics and it's too much data. And it's really, I found it really difficult to actually find those specific bits of information I wanted, especially as I didn't check it very often. So it may be like a couple of months, I'll come back to it and be like, how do I find out what's the most popular page kind of thing? And it's because I'm not a data scientist. I don't deal well with numbers and this kind of thing. I was looking at these things and like, don't know. It's not giving me the answers to the questions that I want to ask. So I looked at other solutions. So I've had, I forgot what it's called, but there's an open source self-hosted version of kind of a Google Analytics thing. Changed name relatively recently. I can't remember what it is off the top of my head. Tried that
Fathom?
before. Third?
Fathom?
Yes. Tried that. It's very similar to Google Analytics. So again, it's information overload for me. I looked at, so it was at that point then I wanted to start to look at using the access logs to get this information, because the access logs kind of have all this information. I knew the access log had all this information that I want to know. I just need some way of querying it and understanding it. So I set off on my journey on the internet to find something that would be able to parse all these access logs, and everybody kept pointing me to, again, I forgot the name, Go something. I'm sure somebody in the chat may sparkle, but if Garrett's online, he's the one that recommends me. Anyway, that was one that parsed your access logs in various different formats and showed you nice pretty graphs, nice pretty dashboards and stuff, and in much more specific information than the Google Analytics. Problem with that is it didn't play nicely with Kubernetes. So it was very much focused on I've got a web server serving a website with Nginx, for example. The Nginx logs then tell me that website information, and I will parse that log. Now in Kubernetes, you've got lots of logs coming in for all these different sites and across multiple servers and all this kind of thing. And there was no real way to kind of hook that into there. I did start down a journey of, okay, can I modify this to fit in? Do I want to write my own to do this? And all that kind of thing. And I kept asking on Twitter and stuff. And then one of the developers behind the Loki project from Grafana messaged me and said, hold on a minute, this functionality is coming to Loki soon. Next week, we've got a conference that will announce it. So I was like, oh, fantastic. I don't need to build something. I watched the conference. I watched the talk. And it basically allowed you to do dynamic label parsing of logs, right? So previously to this, you had to specify the specific labels that you want to parse out of a log to then be able to query against. Now, because you saw that big log file. There's a lot of fields in there in that access log. I didn't want to have to go through and do all that, and that could potentially change, and etc. And if I then want to apply this to maybe something that's not traffic, I'm back to square one. So I waited for this to get released, and I waited and I waited and I waited, and it ended up taking a few months. So it actually got released live, but it went live in version something, 2 something, I think, I can't remember. But as soon as I got live, gave it a try, and does exactly the job I wanted. So you just kind of pass it into Grafana. So you query Loki. For me, it was via Grafana. You tell it the labels you want to filter on that is already parsed in Loki. So that for me, with it being in Kubernetes, there is automatically parsed Kubernetes-based names, labels. So that's things like the namespace it's in, the name of the application, things like that. So I query based on the app name being traffic. So I then get all the traffic logs. I can then pipe that query to a JSON parser in the query, which will then parse out the whole thing as JSON, and I can then query everything in there as if it was a label that was previously known about. So that query can then be piped to another query that says, okay, show me everything where the request host is Marcus Noble. Okay. And that was the missing link that I had to be able to use these tools. So yeah, huge props to Loki for getting that in there.
Nice.
Yeah.
Max just posted in the YouTube chat saying he's been using a self-hosted Piwik Matomo instance.
That was it.
Analytics.
Piwik.
It does the job, but I don't find myself checking it also often, so I think I'd be doing away with analytics might be better. And I think that's a really nice thing. Like, we often don't stop to go, what problems are we actually solving with that thing? Do we need it? So,
yeah.
Like
yeah, so I've seen kind of a few instances of this recently. I've seen some people kind of just replace their analytics with what's effectively a hit counter. Going back to the GeoCities days, not necessarily a visible one, but one that just did a web request to a transparent pixel or something, and just counted the visitors, and that was it. That was all it needed. That's all they cared about. Counted the visitors for that particular page. So they didn't need all that, spying on their users, knowing everything about them, information. They're just what's popular. So yeah, I think that whole taking a step back and okay, what are the questions I want to get answered? Okay, what's the minimum amount I can have to do that?
Yeah, I absolutely totally removed all analytics from my own blog because I wasn't using it.
Yeah.
And the reason I put it in there is because when I worked at an agency, pretty much there was a mantra of step number 1 is setting up a new site for a client, put analytics code in.
Yeah.
Do not do anything else before you do that, and make sure it works and it's the correct account. But like, so what are you using it for? Not even clients ended up using that thing. It's just something that management consultants decided to sell people, and it's like, this is important. So okay.
So I think if I was running some form of e-commerce site that actually had a kind of a transaction flow, then maybe I'd want that kind of thing in, because I'd be able to then track drop-offs and things like that, which would actually be something I'd be interested in, that I probably couldn't get as easily, at least, out of access logs.
Yeah.
But again, I don't think Google Analytics, at least for a small one-person kind of operation, it's just too much there, in my opinion.
Yeah, definitely.
It seems like that's probably a good time for us to wrap up. But firstly, thanks, Marcus. That's it's been amazing to get a little bit of insight into your setup and some of the possibilities of smart homes. In more than just like a lot of the smart home stuff you hear is just, oh, you can do all the things, but you are actually doing all of the things.
Yeah, it was a long journey, and this is some of the me back in the early noughties envisioned, and we're still not at that point. The promise of the smart home of the future is still over in the future, unfortunately. But yeah, it's getting there, I think, slowly, maybe.
So yeah, obviously we do this every month. We got the next one on the second Wednesday of next month. Surprise, surprise. Thanks everyone for coming along and watching and getting involved with the questions on the YouTube channel. If you'd like to be a bit more in the Zoom call than in the channel, come and chat to us, because we'd like to mix everything up. And in the spirit of mixing everything up, we've just volunteered Saren volunteered. I'm not sure how that works.
Bit of both.
MC the next one, and we'll have Mike and Max talking to us about some stuff that sounds really interesting, but I'm not going to give any spoilers because that would be. So yeah.